Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. Today we will discuss the most important and repeated questions of romantic literature. DUCM 3 English Honours. If you are watching from any other university, this can be helpful for you as well. Let's begin. And remember, I will only be explaining the answers a bit. The entire model answers will be on your screen so you can screenshot them. Let's start. Question number 1. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury, who make up a heaven of our misery. This is from Blake's The Chimney Sweeper in the Songs of Experience. Here, the children's sweep exposes how his forced happiness is misled by his own parents as proof he is not suffering. And Blake uses this to attack the church, the priesthood, and the crown for building a false heaven on the backs of exploited children. Question number 2. Though I should gaze forever on that green light that lingers in the west, this comes from the Coleridge dejection. A note. Coleridge is telling us that simply staring at a beautiful landscape cannot restore his lost joy, because true feelings come from within, not from the outward world. A direct philosophical departure from Wordsworth's nature worship. Question 3. Scattered as from an unextinguished hearth, ashes and sparks, my words among mankind. This is the climax of Shelley's Ode to the West Wind. Shelley wants poetry to spread like fire and prophecy, awaking the world and the final line. If wonder comes, can spring be far behind? Because his coded message of political hope after Peterloo. Question 4. Season of mist and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun. These are the opening lines of Keats to Autumn. Autumn is personified as a partner of the sun, working together to ripen the earth. And unlike his other odes, Keats here accepts transience peacefully, instead of resisting it. Question 5. The fallen angel become a malignant devil. Yet even the enemy of God and man had friends. I am alone. This is the creature speaking in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein after reading Paradise Lost. He realizes he is worse off than Satan himself, because even Satan had companions while he has absolutely none, showing that his coming monstrosity is born from isolation, not nature. Question 6. I bore a hell within me, which nothing could extinguish. This is the Victor Frankenstein right after Justin's unjust execution. His guilt become an invisible private hell because he cannot confess the truth. And this marks the point where Victor turns from merely ambitious scientist into a man permanently complicit in the deaths around him. Question number 7. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. This opens Shelley's sonnet, Ozymandias. A ruined statue reported second-hand through a traveler becomes Shelley's most compact statement on the vanity of tyranny and political power against the erosion of time. Now we move to the 20-mark questions. Since these need slightly longer answers, I'll explain them a little bit more. Question number 8. Discuss Coleridge dejection. An ode as a dialogue between hope and despair, along with his attitude to nature. This ode opens with the poet watching a beautiful evening sky yet feeling nothing. I see, not feel, how beautiful they are. He names this condition a grief without a pang, an emotional emptiness more frightening than sharp pain. The real philosophical turn comes when Coleridge declares we receive but what we give, and in our life alone does nature live, completely reversing Wordsworth's idea that nature actively restores the mind. For Coleridge, joy must come from within first. If the inner fountains are dry, no amount of gazing and nature can refill them. He blames his illness, his unhappiness, domestic life, and his retreat into abstruse research for suspending what he calls his shaping spirit of imagination. Yet the poem doesn't end in total despair. In its final stanzas, Coleridge redirects his hope outwards, wishing joy upon the lady instead of himself, a form of vicarious healing. So, this ode is less a simple back and forth between hope and despair and more an argument about where joy actually originates inside the mind, not outside in nature. Question number 9. Discuss the juxtaposition of innocence and experience in Blake, especially through the Chimney Sweeper poem. Blake's full title calls these the two contrary states of the human soul, meaning neither state is simply better than the other. They work together to expose hypocrisy. In Innocence, young Tom Dacre accepts a comforting dream where an angel frees the sweeps into heaven, and the poem ends with a deceptively cheerful line. If all do their duty, they need not fear harm. This shows how religious language can pacify a suffering child. The experienced version strips this illusion away completely. The older, embittered speaker exposes how his own performed happiness is being used by the parents and priests to excuse his exploitation. Blake repeats this same paired technique throughout the songs: The Lamb Against the Tiger and the two Holy Thursday poems, always using simple childlike form to smuggle in a radical critique of church, state, and the institutionalized charity. This locates Blake firmly as a poet of political protest disguised as nursery rhyme. Question number 10. Analyze Wordsworth's evolving relationship with nature in Tinton Abbey. Wordsworth traces three stages of his bond with nature. In boyhood, it was pure physical delight and appetite, requiring no thought. In his first visit to the Y, 5 years earlier, nature was still an intense, unmediated passion, an appetite, a feeling, and a love. But by the time of this present poem, this raw excitement has matured into something deeper. He now hears the still, sad music of humanity and senses a presence that unites mind and nature, moving him towards a near mystical, almost pantheistic vision. Importantly, he does not reject his earlier boyish joy. He sees it as necessary first stage of growth. The poem ends with the Wordsworth blessing his sister Dorothy. Nature will guide her through the same journey, turning the poem into an act of emotional and spiritual inheritance. For Wordsworth, nature is teacher, healer, and moral anchor all at once. Question number 11. Discuss how the West Wind becomes Shelley's instrument of political and poetic thought. Written in terza rima, Dante's interlocking rhyme scheme. The poem's very structure mimics the driving motion of the wind. Across its five sections, the wind is shown acting on land, sky, and sea, always as both destroyer and preserver. The same force that strips the trees also carries seeds that will bloom in spring. This destruction before renewal pattern carries clear political weight since Shelley wrote this shortly after the Peterloo massacre. The third section, describing sunken ancient palaces trembling in the wind's approach, reinforces Shelley's recurring belief that all tyranny eventually collapses under mutability. In the final section, Shelley becomes personal, asking the wind to make him its ire, scattering his own words like seeds to quicken a new birth in human minds, casting the poet as prophet and legislature of the world, someone whose language can hasten political change that direct action cannot. Question number 12. Are Keats' odes an investigation of imagination's ability to cope with the time and change? Yes, and this can be shown through three odes. In Ode to Nightingale, Keats tries to escape mortality through the bird's timeless song, even briefly longing for a painless death. But the word forlorn snaps his back to his soul self, and the escape collapses into contradiction. In Ode to a Grecian Urn, permanence is achieved, but only at the cost of eternal frustration. The lover cannot actually kiss his beloved, since the figures are frozen mid action forever. Finally, to autumn resolves this entire tension instead of chasing people of frozen permanence. Keats simply accepts the nature process of ripening, harvest, and approaching winter as a beautiful in itself. Read together. The odes move from desperate flight through frozen paradox to calm, mature acceptance of transience. Question 13. How does Frankenstein interrogate the very idea of monstrosity? The novel repeatedly shows that creature's so called monstrosity comes from social rejection, not from his nature. Victor abandons him the instant he sees his appearance, denying him even a name. The creature's small act of secret kindness towards the De Lacy family prove he was inclined toward benevolence, until Felix beats him purely for how he looks without even hearing him speak. Meanwhile, the creature's self-education through Paradise Lost, making him more articulate and morally reflective than Victor himself. Mary Shelley inverts our expectation. The physically monstrous creature is sympathetic, while the physically ordinary Victor, through his abandonment, secrecy, and the silence during Justine's trial, is the novel's true moral monster. Question 14. Discuss the subtitle The Modern Prometheus. In light of Victor's scientific ambition and ethical responsibility, like Prometheus stealing fire from the gods, Victor steals the secret of animating dead matter, dreaming of being worshipped as the creator of a new species, but where Prometheus continues to care about humanity even in his suffering. Victor abandons his creation the most moment it opens its eye, fleeing instead of accepting responsibility. His punishment, like Prometheus' endlessly regenerating wound, is a guilt that never resolves and only deepens with every new death. The subtitle frames the novel as a warning. Scientific ambition without ethical responsibility and accountability is inherently self destructive, a message that still resonates today. Question 15. Trace the evolution of imagination and nature across the first and second generation romantics. Wordsworth sees nature as an active, benevolent, moral teacher. Coleridge complicates this by relocating meaning inside the mind itself. Blake barely engages landscape at all, using imagination instead as a tool to expose social and religious operation. The second generation pushes further. Shelley turns imagination into a prophetic revolutionary force meant to transform politics directly, while Keats turns inward, using imagination to investigate art's limited power over mortality, eventually finding peace in accepting nature's own cycle. Overall, the movement goes from imagination as a receptive faculty attentive to a nurturing nature to imagination as an assertive, even embattled, power, comforting an unstable political and existential world. That brings us to the end of all 15 questions. I hope this quick run through helped you revise faster before your exams. Do take screenshots of the answer on your screen. Like the video and subscribe to the channel for more exam focused content. See you in the next video. Happy revising.